Greetings from Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio. This is Joe Usher, Director of Annual Funds. We are pleased to present to you our 2003-2004 Annual Fund donors, a unique expression of thanks for your support of the college. This past year, the Alumni Office completed the third successful year of Learning in the Company of Friends, the Kenyon Lifelong Learning Program, bringing seminars led by President Nugent and distinguished Kenyon professors to Regional Association annual gatherings. To extend the lifelong learning concept and with our appreciation, we thank you again and introduce Harlene Marley, Professor of Drama. A Kenyon faculty member since 1969, Professor Marley was the college's first female tenure-track faculty member. She was the first woman to serve as department chair, the first tenured woman on the faculty, and the first woman to attain the rank of full professor. Beyond teaching her renowned classes in directing and in voice and diction, Professor Marley has an extraordinarily impressive and diverse list of acting and directing credits. Now one of Kenyon's legendary drama teachers, and well known beyond Gambier for her work with the Kennedy Center's American College Theater Festival, Harlene will be off to retirement in the Southwest after next year's sabbatical. At this time of transition herself, Harlene's talk is appropriately titled Transitions, the First Matriculation Oath and Life at Kenyon in 1841 and 2003.
President Georgia Nugent asked me to deliver the address at the Founders' Day convocation at the end of October, and this is the speech that I gave to the class of 2007. Founders' Day is an occasion, a ceremony. The members of the class of 2007 repeated the matriculation oath and added their signatures to the matriculation book. Students have been saying that oath and signing that book for 162 years. It's an occasion. The American playwright Thornton Wilder, who wrote Our Town and Skin of Our Teeth, based much of his work on what he described as the universal, unique experience, an idea he borrowed from the French philosopher Henri Bergson. Wilder explains it this way: every action which has ever taken place, every thought, every emotion has taken place only once, at one moment in time and place. I love you, I rejoice, I suffer, have been said and felt many billions of times and never twice the same. Every person who has ever lived has lived an unbroken succession of unique occasions. Yet the more one is aware of the individuality in experience, the more one becomes attentive to what these disparate moments have in common, to repetitive patterns. Wilder goes on to say that theater, that is to say enacted occasions, have, and I'm quoting again, the power to raise the exhibited individual action into the realm of idea and type and universal. This occasion of signing the matriculation oath was first enacted in 1841, at a time when the college was in transition. It was, in fact, a new college. At its founding, Kenyon and the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Diocese of Ohio were a unified institution with a single faculty and administration. In 1839, after winning a complex power struggle with the Board of Trustees and the faculty, President Bishop Charles McIlvaine separated the two. So for the first time in its brief history, Kenyon College was an institution distinct from the seminary and with its own faculty, a faculty of 3. The new college had a new president, a retired military officer named David Bates Douglas, whose name appears on the college gates. In fact, Douglas erected those gates, and then there were actually gates in them. He was the great-grandfather of actress Catherine Cornell. He was not very popular with the students. We would be disoriented on the grounds of the college that Douglas found when he arrived in Gambier in the spring of 1841. The only buildings that we would recognize would be Old Kenyon and Ross Hall, although only the basement was completed and the auditorium was an empty, unfinished shell. Old Kenyon, although less than 20 years old, was shabby and dilapidated. What we call the College Park was a disorganized conglomeration of wooden buildings, residences, and temporary shacks. There were heaps of rubbish and wood piles everywhere. There were no paths or drives, and very few trees. In fact, it was Douglas, trained as an engineer, who devised the master plan of the campus where we work today. In the spring of 1841, Kenyon enrolled about 50 students. They were all men, of course. One of those was a junior named Rutherford Burchard Hayes, although his friends and family called him Rudd. Apparently, Kenyon was his second choice. He wanted to go to Yale, but for financial and family reasons, he decided to stay closer to his home in Delaware, Ohio. Rudd frequently wrote to his mother and sister back home, and he had just begun keeping a diary. He was not very impressed with the new president. In June, he wrote to his mother, "The president has introduced a few novel plans and undertaken some reforms. He has succeeded, but indifferently in either. He has also ordained that all students shall be matriculated, a heathenish rite imported from England, very proper in large institutions, but its main object here happens to be the raising of a fund of money." However, Douglas seems to have seen matriculation as a formal way to create a sense of community in this new college. So on 17 July 1841, the college had a summer session then, students heard President Douglas make a speech in which he said, "We hold education to be the development of an immortal mind. In this sense, all its influences are eminently social and fraternizing, for it is in the intercourse and companionship of mind with mind that its most instructive and important lessons are learned, and this is the view upon which matriculation proceeds. It is a formal adoption into the personal fellowship of a literary community." The oath was similar to the one students repeat today, although it was somewhat longer. 30 students, including Rudd Hayes, signed it. Who were they, these 30 young men declared in statu pupillari by the document they just signed? Many, like Hayes, were from Ohio, from Mount Vernon and Utica and Worthington and Dayton and Cincinnati. But in an era when many Americans never traveled further from their homes than a horse could travel in one day, it's surprising how many of those 30 were from long distances, from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., Michigan, Virginia, Texas. We can still read those 30 signatures in the matriculation book. There are even a few pictures made as students tried out the latest novelty, one of several photographic processes introduced in the late 1830s, about the time that Morse invented the telegraph. There's even a picture of Rudd Hayes with his best friend Guy Bryan and their friend Stanley Matthews, who was a year ahead of them and who later became a Supreme Court justice. But it's hard for us to imagine them as individuals, aside from Hayes, whose letters and diary give us considerable insight into what was on his 19-year-old mind. They didn't have the common experience or the companionship of electronic media. This was a time when people either had to leave their homes for entertainment, not easy to do in rural Ohio, or make it themselves. God knows it's easy for us to imagine Gambier without electricity, but it's hard for us to know how the minds of those students were furnished. Hayes and his classmates would have known about the War for Texas Independence and the disaster at the Alamo. In fact, Guy Bryan was a veteran of that war. At the age of 15, before he came to Kenyon, he served as an orderly in the Texan Army, and at one point he and his mother fled the advancing Mexican Army. They probably knew that in the February before they signed the book in 1841, John Quincy Adams argued and won the Amistad case before the Supreme Court. And they certainly knew that only a month later, in March, President William Henry Harrison died of pneumonia 4 weeks after taking office, and that John Tyler now occupied the White House. We do know a little about students' daily routine. They were awakened by a bell at 5 a.m. and took a sponge bath behind Old Kenyon. They ate breakfast in a common dining room and then attended a mandatory chapel service usually held in the basement of Ross Hall. They spent the day in class, had dinner, followed by another chapel service, and were expected to spend the evening studying until lights out at 9 p.m. Students were required to sweep their own rooms, make their own fires, carry their own water, and to take an occasional turn working in the college gardens and farms or on the roads. President Douglas laid out Middle Path from the center door of Old Kenyon, 1,500 feet due north. The path was built on a foundation of broken stone and gravel, and students supplied some of the labor. A few years later, a Professor Ross and other students planted maple trees along the path. The curriculum that students studied every night until 9 p.m. was based on the Greek and Latin classics. Freshmen read Cicero, Xenophon, Livy, and Herodotus, with algebra and trigonometry for dessert. The juniors who signed the oath had added Tacitus and Plato, physics, rhetoric, and logic. Students were expected to read and translate aloud and to give speeches to the entire college. Examinations were oral. In 1841, Kenyon had the largest library of any college west of the Alleghenies. In addition, the Philomathesian Society and Nu Pi Kappa, the two extracurricular debating societies, maintained their own libraries. For a few months, students could also read The Knapsack, Kenyon's first journal of literature and humor. It was handwritten, and Hayes wrote a piece for it. Tuition was $30 per year, and that was only the cost of instruction. In addition, students paid $4 per month to rent a room with a stove, or $6 for the luxury of a fireplace. Eating in the dining hall cost $1.75 per week. Hayes kept a meticulous account of his expenses. They include things like firewood, quills, ink, and bed filling. In his junior year, he paid $3.75 for 3 textbooks. There was a bakery in the village, and Hayes regularly indulged himself in what his account books call various knickknacks. He was sometimes in debt to the bake shop. In 1841, Kenyon had no organized team sports, although Abner Doubleday had introduced baseball just a couple of years before. Much of the college's extracurricular life was organized around the activities of the two debating societies. As they came and went on campus, students had to remove or at least touch their hats when they met a member of the faculty or administration. Let it be said that faculty and administrators had to do the same. Fannie Hayes, Rudd's sister, wrote him, urging him to try to like his teachers. He wrote back, "I do like them, a great ways off." The college discouraged it, but students spent a good deal of time fishing in the river and hunting in the countryside. Expenditures for fish hooks and ammunition regularly appear in Hayes' account books. It was also against the rules for students to cook their kill in their rooms, but they did it anyway. Kenyon's rules of behavior were strict and punishment was swift. It often consisted of expulsion from the college. In 1841, the faculty dismissed a number of students for drinking. Hayes wrote in his diary, quoting one of the classical authors he studied, "Resist tyranny in every shape, but in none so dangerous as when exercised by a number of tyrants. This latter clause suits the faculty of Kenyon College." So what became of those 30 individuals who graduated in 1842, wearing blue denim jackets with black velvet collars, white vests, and white linen trousers? A couple of them died young. Many became lawyers or clergymen. Some went west. Ethan Allen Jr. from Dayton became a California merchant in the years following the gold rush. Hugh Hamilton from Pennsylvania became a lawyer and businessman and served in local government in LaGrange, Iowa. Roland Trowbridge from Detroit used his Latin and Greek farming near Chicago. All their lives were changed by the Civil War. Ovid Americus Kinsolving from Virginia became an Episcopal clergyman who worked hard to keep the church from splitting during the war. He beat his children. Hayes left his Cincinnati law practice to become an officer in the Ohio Volunteers. His friend, Guy Bryan, went back to Texas to study law. Although he served in the United States Army during the Mexican War, he supported secession and held various offices in the Confederate government and army. Hayes had a successful political career. And now let's look at the occasion of Founders Day 1969. Once again, the college was undergoing a major transition, perhaps its most significant since 1841. I was in transition too. Bexley Hall, the Episcopal seminary that Bishop McIlvaine created when he separated the faculties of the college and the seminary, had just merged with another seminary in Rochester, New York. The college had a new president, William Caples, who was formally inaugurated in April 1969. He was not very popular with the students. But the real change, the one that forever transformed the college, was the arrival of about 100 women students, members of the class of 1973. For the first time, women students sat in Kenyon classrooms and walked the middle path that President Douglas laid out and studied in the library, no longer the largest west of the Alleghenies. Although women had taught classes at Kenyon from time to time, notably during World War II, in the fall of 1969, the faculty included its first full-time woman professor. That's me. When we gathered at Wertheimer Field House, which the class of 2007 never saw, on 13 October 1969, men had just landed on the moon. Paul Newman did not make salad dressing. There was no email, and there were no athletic opportunities for women students. But there were Saturday classes. On TV, we watched Marcus Welby, MD, and the Brady Bunch, no cable. Probably most of the class of 1973 could not remember a home without television. We had all seen Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider, The Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. Our personal soundtracks were provided by the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan. Our minds were on American troops fighting in the jungles of Vietnam, Woodstock, drugs, and hair. Everyone's was longer and mine was a different color. Novelist Don DeLillo says, "Every memory we have is, finally, of ourselves." But women students did not sign the matriculation oath that day. Although women took their classes at Kenyon with Kenyon faculty, sitting side by side with Kenyon men, and would eventually receive Kenyon degrees, they were officially members of the Coordinate College, presided over by Dean Doris Crozier, with separate residences in dorms 1 and 2, now Mather and McBride. The administration intended the Coordinate College to develop its own governance and traditions parallel to Kenyon's, including a coordinate matriculation oath. But since the women had arrived barely 2 months before, they had not had time to develop an instant tradition. As a result, Coordinate College students were not permitted to sign Kenyon's matriculation oath. That oath was more or less the one you see today, although it said faithful sons of Kenyon. At that Founders' Day ceremony, when we stood to sing, I was the faculty's only soprano. In any event, the administration of the college was quick to recognize the inescapable realities of student life and dissolved the Coordinate College in the winter of 1972. After that, women students were officially Kenyon students. The matriculation oath was revised to say sons and daughters, so simple. And the women of the class of 1973 signed the book retroactively as juniors, just like the first class who signed it in 1841. And now, you must imagine that you are once again in your first year at Kenyon. So here you are, the class of 2007, on this unique occasion. Of course, the unique individual you aren't typical, but if you were, you cut your media teeth on Sesame Street and Disney Kids. In the summer before you left for Gambier, you saw Pirates of the Caribbean and Old School, but you had to wait till October for Kill Bill and December for Lord of the Rings. You buy your clothes at American Eagle or a thrift store. Your mind is furnished with images of American soldiers fighting in deserts, the Columbia disintegrating in a bright blue Texas sky, and the bright blue sky of 9/11. Your personal soundtrack thumps with Dave Matthews or hip-hop or your favorite indie band, you fill in the blanks. In your baggage, you packed high board scores, a wormy computer, pictures of family and friends, and the hometown boyfriend or girlfriend whom you're too kind to dump. You were a high school star, academically or athletically or artistically. You had wonderful orthodontia. This year, the college is once again in transition. It has a new president. It's also a time of transition for me and, of course, for the class of 2007. One of the problems with giving a speech about the transitory nature of transition and the changelessness of change is that there's no way to end it. I suppose that as the first this and that and the senior whatever, you expect me to leave the class of 2007 with words of encouragement and good advice. So here are my encouraging words. The first year of college is not the best year of your life. It's hard to come to college. It's hard to leave behind the pet you grew up with or the hometown boyfriend or girlfriend whom you don't want to dump. It's hard to leave behind your family's cooking or the good sushi place in your neighborhood or the corner hot dog stand. You brought the wrong clothes. You can't find a reliable cell phone connection. Your family has worked hard all your life so you can have a room of your own, but now you've been asked to share a space the size of a Ford Expedition with a total stranger. You were a high school star, but you find yourself here with 1,499 other high school stars. And let's face it, your classes are not one face-burning epiphany right after another. The unique occasion of Founders Day was the third time in 2 months that students were asked to attend a ceremony during which they listened to speeches and watched the faculty parade around in our funny clothes, appropriately on Halloween. One of the things that Kenyon does well is these ceremonies, and they're important, including repeating the matriculation oath and signing the book, because participating in them connects your unique individual experience as a faithful son or daughter of Kenyon to the universal experience of that long, unbroken line of professors and students who continue the creation of a college on Gambier Hill. And here's my good advice. Get a flu shot. Go to class.